So you found yourself in the position of trying to find a beginner Greek grammar. What I have here are four, or probably the four most popular, at least amongst the beginning Greek grammars that I know of. There are many, many more. This is by no means exhaustive, but I thought it would be sometimes the more options that you have, the more confusing it gets. So, and besides that, these are the four that I'm familiar with. So if I were to be reviewing other books, I wouldn't really be able to give you an honest opinion because I don't know them. So, but I do feel that these four grammars are a good representation of what's available, as well as the different methods and different styles. Because although at the end of the day it is still the same language, there are different approaches that can be taken to learn Greek. And remember, this is specifically New Testament Greek, which would be, or Koine Greek. So this would be different from if you're going to learn classical Greek, such as Attic or Homeric Greek. Those are a little more complicated. So just bear that in mind. This is specifically tailored towards those who want to learn the New Testament. So really there are two questions that you want to ask yourself when you're looking for New Testament grammar. And that's the first question is this, are you being teaching yourself, or are you going through a course? Now, I ask this because some of these books, although all of these books are excellent and that they will definitely get the job done, they're not all ideal for self-taught people. So if you are an individual who is autodidactic and you're teaching yourself, which is where the situation I found myself in, some of these books, although all of them would be good for reference, I don't believe that all of them would be, some of them wouldn't be ideal for teaching yourself. So now, let's start with the first one here. We have is by J. Gresham Machen, New Testament Greek for Beginners. This was probably the most used grammar in all of history. It was published in 1920 something, I think 23, and really it was the first of its kind. Yeah, 1923. This book was the first of its kind because it was up until that time there weren't really any user-friendly Greek grammars, and so he really was revolutionary in publishing this. It is a little bit dated, but again, if you're going through a course and your seminary requires you to use this grammar, it's totally fine. We're talking about everybody before the 1990s was using this grammar. And so one thing that I will say is I would not recommend it necessarily for being a self-taught student, again, unless you have a video course. Also, it does not have an answer key to the exercises in the book. So for example, we have these exercises here. And when you complete them, the problem is that it does not contain the answers. So you actually have to buy those in a separate volume, which is okay because this book, I believe, is actually the copyright is actually public domain. So you could actually download this PDF and then just purchase the small little booklet on the side for grading or teaching yourself. But again, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this if you're going to teach yourself. However, it is a great reference tool, and you should have it eventually. If you're ever going to get serious about studying the New Testament, I recommend you have it. It's a handy reference tool. The next one on the docket here is The Basics of Biblical Greek by Bill Mounts. Now this one, right now, I would say is the most currently widely used Greek New Testament grammar. This one was published in the 90s, and really it revolutionized how studies are made. Of the grammars that I have here right in front of me, this is the one I'm actually the least familiar with. So his approach is quite different than, say, Machen's or even these other grammars here. What Bill Mounts tried to do, and some students love it, some students hate it. Again, I can't really speak too much for it because I'm not that familiar with it. But if you'll notice that his grammar is quite a bit thicker than these other grammars. And the reason is because he gives a lot more information about morphology. Now, morphology is simply the way that Greek words change. So if you're not familiar with how the average Greek word works, especially verbs and nouns, the sentence, a Greek sentence is not, the meaning does not come from word order like in English. Rather, the meaning of a sentence comes from the endings and the prefixes and the suffixes that are attached to words. So you could have a root word, but at the beginning there might be a couple extra letters, and at the bottom there'll be a couple extra letters, and that will tell you what function that word has and what it plays in the sentence, whether or not it's the subject or the object, whether or not it's an adjective or a noun or a verb. It doesn't matter. These words, it's not word order, but rather word formation. Now, what Bill Mounce did is he created a system where you can learn the rules of how this happens so you do not have to memorize as many paradigms. So there are a lot of paradigms to memorize. And whereas Machen would do something where it's more a brute force method where you just memorize them by rote memory, Bill Mounce had a system where he would try to teach the rules, so if you knew the rules, you wouldn't have to memorize all the paradigms. Now, I think it's a good idea, and if a student followed it, and many have, I think there's over 400,000 copies of this sold, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in the Greek world, that's a substantial amount. I believe if you follow Bill Mounce's method, I'm sure it would work great. The only problem, like I said, is that I didn't start with this grammar. I'll actually, the next one I'm going to review is the one that I started with. But so when I tried to use this grammar, the method is so different from the other grammars that I could not. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. He does tend to have a lot more information contained within the grammar, and so and it's very handy for reference. So. There's nothing wrong with this grammar at all. I do think that it's very good. Like I said, I'm not as familiar with it. However, obviously, this is a very well-used grammar around the world. So, I would attribute my lack of enjoyment in it to user error rather than the author, because Bill Mounce is definitely a well-respected scholar. So, anyway. Again, or quickly, I would not necessarily recommend this one either for self-study. If you have, like I said, a video course, which Bill Mounce does have a video course, same with J. Gresham Machen. He doesn't himself. He's long since passed away, but there's a gentleman on YouTube by the name of Bruce Gore. If you type in Bruce Gore, that's Brucegore, Bruce Gore, New Testament lessons, he'll come up and he teaches through Machen's grammar. So there's a video course and it's very, very good. I love Bruce Gore. I've gone through it myself. So very excellent. So if you want to do that. Now the same thing with Bill Mounce. However, Bill Mounce himself made videos that are companion videos to go along with this grammar. So if you want to, you could basically pretend that you're in one of his classes and he teaches through his grammar. So once again, if that's what you're doing, or if the seminary you're at requires that you use this grammar, then go with it and embrace it. It'll be a great grammar. So, okay. The next one on the list is Learn to Read New Testament Greek by David Allen Black. Now, this grammar is the one that I happen to be the most familiar with because this is actually the grammar that I use to learn the Greek of the New Testament. Would I recommend this for self-study? No. And the reason is because this grammar, I think this grammar works best and shines at its best as a refresher tool. The same with Bill Mounce. If you are going through a seminary course and this is the grammar that they have you go through, it will be excellent. But if you were just simply to pick up this grammar and read it, just the grammar, and think you're going to learn, although it's possible you can learn, I don't think it's the best tool because it's more concise in his terminology, and that makes it ideal as a reference tool, but not ideal in the sense of when you're trying to learn a language, because there's all of these terms and phrases that you're not familiar with, and it is very difficult to learn a new language from scratch, especially if you've never done it before or if you're not familiar with the rules and terms that grammarians use. So if you'll notice, Bill Mounce's grammar is much thicker than Black's. So once again, the information you're getting is in a much more concise and compact package, which I think makes it ideal for reference. Now, it kind of breaks my heart to say that, because in reality, the way that I think about Greek is written in my mind is in the terms that David Allen Black uses. So, for example, just a simple example, David Allen Black does something in here that I really like, and my brain thinks about these examples in his terms. So, for example, the Greek word luo, if you were to if it were to include what's called the augment, which is be an epsilon before the beginning of the word, like I said, most grammars will call that the augment. Well, David Allen Black calls it something different. He refers to it as the past time morpheme. Now, that doesn't, I know that sounds, it sounds a lot more complicated to say that than the augment. But the reason is because, remember how I mentioned in Bill Mounce's grammar that his focus is very heavy on morphology? Remember, morphology is how words in the Greek language change their form. Well, Black also focuses on morphology, but he does so in a different way. So although there's not as much information as in Mounce's, because you will do more memorizing of paradigms in here, at the same time, I think he cuts it down to a bare minimum. And so, like I said, he refers to the augment as the past time morpheme, or he refers to the stem, which would be the root word. Most call them the stem. He refers to it as the lexical morpheme. And I really like how he explains it in this grammar. So like I said, I'm probably biased because my brain thinks in terms of Black. But anyway, there is a video course if you want to go through it. It's free. It's on YouTube by David Allen Black teaching through his grammar. It's an excellent video course. They're a little dated as far as the filming goes, and sometimes the audio quality is not the best, but you can't beat free. And there is no beating David Allen Black's passion. So this guy is actually one of my heroes. And if I ever get a chance to meet him, I would love to do so. But anyway, I think that this grammar is at its best as a reference tool. So now, this brings us to the next one, the final one. And that is Beginning with New Testament Greek by Benjamin Merkle and Robert Plummer. This one is the new kid on the block, so to speak. This grammar is hot off the press. I think it's only, it was printed in 2020, I believe. I could be wrong, but it was very, very recent. Anyway, 2020. This grammar, I think, is the ideal grammar if you're going to teach yourself. Now, let's say you're going through a course and this is the grammar that you choose. It's actually that the professor chooses to go through. It's actually highly likely that that will happen, because this grammar right now is taking the seminary world by storm. I know that all the Baptists, especially Southern Baptists, have switched this grammar, and that's no surprise because one of the professors, at least, Robert Plummer, is the professor of Greek at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, which is the largest, I believe it's actually the largest seminary in the United States, or at least conservative seminary in the United States. But anyway, they're all switching to this grammar, and there's a specific reason for that, and this is why I think that this grammar is ideal if you're teaching yourself. And there's two reasons. One is because Robert Plummer and Ben Merkle take a different approach to learning Greek than these other grammars. And what he does is he combines the traditional method, which would be known as grammar translate, and he combines that with the more modern natural or linguistic language approach. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, let me explain. Typically, when you're talking about learning a dead language or ancient language, such as Latin or Greek, they will teach the language to you differently than you would learn, say, a living language. Let's say you're going to learn German or Spanish. The way that they would teach you those languages, a dead language versus a modern language, is different. Dead languages, such as Greek and Latin, they'll teach it to you in the grammar translate method, where they will teach you the grammar, teach you how it works, and then you can break down sentences. And typically it's been referred to as like a sort of crossword or puzzle style of translation. Now, the living language approach is different because what they do is they teach you the language as if like it's still alive, because it is. So they'll teach you phrases such as and not the grammar, but a phrase, like a sentence structure. So they'll teach you, where's the bathroom, or my name is John, or your name is, what's your name, hello, goodbye. And they'll teach you the vocabulary first and how it's worked together, and then they'll sort of explain the grammar along the way. Now, there's a lot of advocates recently that are claiming that this is the best way to learn Greek, as in we learn it like a living language. Now, what Robert Plummer's done is he's acknowledged the fact that this is a much easier way of learning the language if you learn it in a living way. But along with that caveat is, especially if you're going to learn the New Testament, grammar is extremely important, because that's the whole point of learning Greek for the New Testament, is the grammar gives you exegetical insights into the text. Otherwise, if you simply learn it as a living language, then how is it any different than you reading reading your New Testament in English? Which is you'll be able to read it fluently, perhaps, but you'll be you'll be able to speak it, but you'll be grammar light. You'll have a hard time understanding some of the concepts. So anyway, what Ben Merkle and Robert Plummer did is they combined both of those methods. So they use grammar when it's necessary, and they also incorporate elements of the living language approach, which I think is brilliant. And now you'll notice this book is quite thick, actually. I believe it's not quite as thick as Mounce's, but very close. Very close. And it is set up ideally for both self-teaching and a seminary. So their writing style is extremely, I don't want to say simple because it makes it sound like it's not scholarly, but they've written it in such a way that even if you didn't have the videos, which by the way, he has videos for these. He has all these resources that go with it for free. So by contrast, Black doesn't really have additional resources apart from his video. Mounce has a ton of resources, but you have to buy them. Machen definitely does not have any additional resources. This has all the resources that Bill Mounce's grammar has, but they're all, for the most part, free. He also has videos that he teaches through this grammar, and you can find them at his website. They aren't really on YouTube that I could find, so I took them from his website and I published them on my channel here. It's not my content. I just put it on there because it was very difficult to find on YouTube, and I prefer to do things on YouTube. It's just much simpler for me. But anyway, so he has videos teaching through it. He has all these different, he has got vocabulary videos where he's going through each vocabulary from each lesson. Another thing that he does that I really like is he has the vocabulary for the next lesson at the ending of the previous lesson. So you'll finish a chapter, you'll go through the exercises, and then he'll give you a list of vocabulary that you need to memorize. You memorize that vocabulary, and then when you go to the next chapter, all of the words that he's going to be using and all of the different lessons and exercises, they're going to incorporate that grammar or the vocabulary that you memorized from the previous chapter. So you won't be memorizing vocabulary on the go. You'll be able to go right into the lesson seamlessly. So I really like that. So anyway, I recommend beginning Greek with New Testament Greek by Robert Plummer and Ben Merkle if you're going to learn by yourself. And if you're going to go through a seminary, I also recommend it. Really, I think that it's probably the best grammar out available today. And he has, I'll do another video talking about intermediate grammars next. But I actually have intermediate grammars for each one of these. But again, I really like this system because his intermediate grammar for this particular one, this beginning with New Testament Greek, is also excellent. So, and it's written in much the same way. So, anyway, with that being said, I hope that this video helped you. And anyway, throw any comments if I said something wrong or anything you'd like to see. And anyway, God bless. Talk to you later.